Go. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. We are waiting on people to join. And we should see the attendees joining any minute now. We're starting to get some people in. Awesome. Good afternoon, everybody. We had a little technical mishap, but we handled it and we're all good. People are joining right now. All right. Please continue chatting. We were chatting so well. Paul, Tim, and Steve, as everybody's getting online. Grateful for everybody's time. The room is starting to fill up, which is absolutely awesome. Welcome to our 2022 planning webinar. I'm excited to be here and looking forward to a really good session. A couple of housekeeping things before we start rolling. I will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A box, so please make it active. We have 4 awesome guests here, and it is an Ask Me Anything type of a format. So please ask any questions about 2022, their area of specialty, or anything like that. Just can somebody test the Q&A box real quick? And can any one of our attendees please just throw in a question just to make sure we're there, just to test everything, to make sure it's working. And then I'm going to throw out a question for the chat as we get started, just to drive up the engagement a little bit. The question that I would like you guys to answer is, as you guys look at your 2022 challenges, what is your top challenge? All right. So in the chat, just jot down what your absolute top challenge is. Okay. I'd love to see some answers in there. Okay. There we go, everybody. Awesome. And we'll give people a few more minutes to start joining. And as everybody is joining, I'm going to go ahead and do a quick introduction for all of the panelists. My name is Raj Kapur. I'm the founder and managing director of And Marketing. I'm joined by Paul Ferguson, the director of business intelligence for And Marketing, Christine Miles, the founder and CEO of Equipped, Steve Pepe, the vice president of global marketing for Oliver Healthcare, and Tim Walters, the founder and CEO of Boom Cloud Consulting. Awesome. So again, the Q&A and the chats are open. Would love to have some questions start to populate anytime during this webinar. Like we always say, this is not a passive webinar. These are entirely fueled by your questions. So please feel free to throw any questions in there at any time. We are looking forward to it. Oh, we just got a whole big flood of people joining up. Perfect. So please go ahead and throw any questions in here. We are looking forward to getting started. So once again, throw in the chat, what is your biggest business challenge right now? The theme of today's webinar is uncertainty. So as we know, and the calendar gets ready to turn to yet another challenging, uncertain year, we know that uncertainty is on people's minds. So as a barometer of uncertainty, we did a poll on LinkedIn a few weeks ago. Again, it's an informal poll, but we asked people what their #1 challenge in their business is right now. We gave a few choices. We said supply chain. We said labor force. So labor force could be hiring, could be firing, could be retention, could be any of those. Rising costs and inflation, or something else. And if you dig into the something else comments, there's actually a bunch of them that relate to, well, there's more than one, or there's a bunch of nuances there. It feels like those 3, and then there's a few other ones on top of there. What really surprised me about this result is that a lot of people are talking about supply chain right now, but that was really dwarfed by labor force. Anybody that I knew in the financial services industry is talking about rising costs and inflation. So it's really an interesting time to be in business because you're getting a little bit of all 3 of those. So again, would love to hear questions from you guys. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is start by asking our group to introduce themselves and then offer their #1 piece of advice to business owners and business leaders right now as it comes to 2022 planning. So Paul, you want to go introduce yourself and start off?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Ferguson. As Raj mentioned, I am our Director of Business Intelligence and Marketing for And Marketing. So naturally, being the marketing data geek that I am, I always like to start backwards before I can move forward. So I want to see how we did and how we measured up towards our previous goals during the previous year. I want to see what was driving that. So I'm looking at all of our data. I'm looking to try to align that. And then I'm seeing what marketing efforts, what business efforts were the most fruitful. And once I get an understanding of that, then I start to think about how can I improve on that and optimize that and meet our overall goals for the new year? And that's generally where I go.
Awesome, Paul. Thank you so much. Starting with data and analytics. Christine, tell us a little bit about you and what's your number one piece of advice?
I'm Christine Miles. I'm the CEO and founder of Equipped. We believe that understanding is really the key to success in business, and we'll throw in personal life. Understanding your customers, understanding your employees, understanding each other. And the number one problem we solve for businesses is what it costs not to listen. So not surprisingly, my advice is going to be related to that, which is really that it's in these kind of uncertain times, and there's a lot changing constantly. I think the slowing down to speed up is a really good place to start, making sure that we're just taking the step back to really understand before we, as much like Paul said, understand the data and his advice, and understand before we, think about the trends or just assume that what we're hearing is the correct answer. Really evaluate, step back, slow down.
Christine, say a little bit more on that. I feel like the pressure is more than ever for business owners and business leaders to go fast. So help me balance. I'm a business leader. I'm planning for 2022. How do I balance the need for speed and the need to be nimble, which is usually my differentiator, with the importance of stepping back?
Well, I don't think it's step back and do nothing. I think it's step back and really be thoughtful about what you're going to do next. So I liken a lot of things to a sports analogies. Most times we don't score when we're just running down the field at speed. We have to pull the ball back or move it over. And that's what really gets us more progress. So I think it's what we do when we slow down and realize that can feel counterintuitive in this critical time, but it's more important than ever, because, we can make decisions based on false premises if we're not making sure we slow down and understand first.
I love it, Christine. Love it. Next up, Steve Pepe. Steve, I know you're going through your annual planning cycle right now. So what advice do you have? Tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. So I'm the Vice President Global Marketing at Oliver Healthcare. What we do is all of the sterile packaging for medical devices and vaccines. So things like small pouches, if you will, or trays with lids that a doctor or a nurse would open in the operating room. You have to make sure that gets there safe. That's our job at Oliver. And it's been quite an uncertain 2020 and 2021. So trying to plan ahead for 2022, my top advice is to stay really close to your operations team. Because if supply chain and labor are the concerns that Raj just showed us, I wouldn't be a good partner to the business if I'm out promoting or trying to create demand gen around something that the operations team is already underwater on or trying to keep up with rising demand. So I'll start with that before we get into other pieces later about just trying to know your business and make sure you're not promoting something you can't handle.
Yeah.
Right.
Know that business starts well. Steve, if you could talk just for a moment, I'll certainly go on to Tim, but as soon as you talk about healthcare packaging, I can't think of an industry that was more disrupted by COVID and more upside down. Can you talk a little bit about the experience of managing that chaos over the last 18 months? I think people would be fascinated by that.
Yeah. Boy, that's a loaded question, Raj.
Yeah,
that's
just do your best. I think anytime
I'll tell you,
anytime we talk about
it really changed my definition of marketing. So I always think of good marketing as listening to the customer, trying to identify their needs first. But when things are changing so fast, how do you predict what's next? And I would say the communications aspect came out even more. So the first 6 months of COVID was just trying to make sure our employees understood what we were doing as we all became dispersed and out of the office and trying to work from home. So the communications aspect of marketing became that much more important. And then after that, it was just to have as many conversations as you can over Zoom, over survey, to just understand what's next. The customer's needs could change in 30 days, right? So annual planning became monthly planning and quarterly planning.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Christine, anything to add there?
I think that's slowing down to speed up. I mean, I think it's so important, when we're under pressure, the pause is really what helps us make the best decisions, and decisions matter, as you attested to, Steve. So,
Great point, Christine.
Jeff Bezos quotes are so overdone, but one just pops in mind right now. It's that in any given day or any given week, we're only as business leaders asked to make a few decisions. So if we try to go really fast and make too many decisions and try to take on too much, the few really important ones are the ones that we miss. And so slowing down and actually making sure you make the right few decisions could be really key. And when, I'm sure you're looking back on it with gray hair and a lot of thoughts around it, Steve, but in that moment when you have to make those decisions, those are really tough.
Well,
Last but not least,
can I add something to that, Raj?
absolutely, of course.
What we don't realize is as executives, we spend 80% of our day listening to problem solve and to make the right decisions. So, but we're not taught how. So that's the other thing is you need to make sure that this sounds very, of course, ask the right questions, know what you're looking for. But sometimes we're doing that in a way that we don't even know that we don't know what the right questions are. So that's part of slowing down as well, is making sure you're surrounding it in the best possible way with all facets of things, because listening is really how to make the decisions.
Absolutely. That's great. That's great. All right, Tim.
Another thing, real quickly,
Yeah,
Raj, another thing to add to that is not being afraid to pivot, right? Obviously, we had this life-changing thing occur. And if you maintained your current strategy when the rest of the marketplace was going in a different direction, you were doomed to fail. So making sure that you're listening to the marketplace, your own employees, your own business, and not being afraid to pivot away from your strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And data is the foundation of that, Paul, right? I think that's great. All right, Tim Walters, you're up. Tell us a little bit about you. What's your number one piece of advice?
Yeah, absolutely. And Raj, you had to make the gray hair comment before I came up. Really appreciate that.
It's silver in your case, Tim. So
yeah,
at least
exactly.
you have some, Tim. Mine would be gray, but I don't have any.
That's what I always tell everybody. I'm happy to have hair. So yes, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me on. Tim Walters, founder and CEO of Boom Cloud Consulting. Just real quick, what is Boom Cloud? We're an outsourced sales and sales consulting company. So it was started with the idea to help small businesses grow and with the actual activities of sales. So lead generation, closing deals, sales strategy, things like that. I think my one, I guess one tip of advice today for now is to focus on the things you can control. So obviously with everything going on, and especially, in the last 2 years, you just don't know what's ahead of us for 2022. But from a sales perspective, and that's where I'm coming from. From a sales perspective, the things you can control are very simple. I'm a big fan of keeping things simple, knowing who your customer is, knowing where, and how do you know who your customer is? Know where your business is coming from, who's referring you that business, why they're buying from you, and put your plan in place and the right activities in place to go and find more of those customers. And if you at least, I know Paul mentioned, yes, we can be agile and you can shift and things like that. But if you go back and you take a look at the data from last year and you see who was buying your service or your product, put your plan in place to go after them this year from a sales perspective, and keep it simple. Make sure you're doing the right activities and the right things to do to get those customers. So yeah, I think focus on what you can control. In most cases, revenue solves a lot of problems. I know that's not what Steve is exactly talking about with operations, but focus on getting more of those ideal customers in, and you'll be good.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great, Tim. We intentionally brought together differing points of view, right? We got sales, we got data and analytics, we got marketing leadership, and Christine sort of in the overall listening and leadership area. So intentionally, we wanted to bring a different, diverse group of people. So the first question just popped up in the chat, and it's really about sales and marketing collaboration. And I think all four of you could take this, so I'll let whoever has an interesting answer jump in. But what are the key tips for sales and marketing collaboration during this period of uncertainty? Who wants to grab that one?
I'll start, Raj, and I'll start by just saying, talk to each other. That's probably my biggest tip there, is make sure sales and marketing are talking to each other. I know Raj and I have probably talked about this plenty of times, but it's purely like just a gap, right, in actual communication. And I think it's easy to say and do that when you're a smaller business or a mid-market sized business, but it's a much harder to do that at an enterprise scale. So take a look at the data for the previous year, use your marketing folks to be able to give you that data, and then make sure the sales plans and activities align with what marketing is telling you to, and the other way around. So from a selfish sales standpoint, I love it when marketing will ask the salespeople what they're hearing out in the marketplace as well. So it's important to kind of, the salespeople are on the front lines, are the one talking to the customers. So certain buzzwords and things just aren't jiving. I think the salespeople would be good to know those answers. So talk to each other.
Yeah, I think that's great. Who wants to jump on that?
Tim, I'll build on that. I think that's can't agree more, right? And especially because the current customers will give you such an insight into what's working.
Yeah.
There's sometimes always a discussion of the account we don't have or the leads that we need to go get, that new business that's out there, when there's all this current business kind of staring you in the face saying, you're helping me, what more can you do for me? So I think I love the idea of more collaboration between sales and marketing to say, yes, there's new business to be had, but what about existing business? What are they doing well? How are we helping them? Let's listen to them. All right, sales, what are you hearing from them? Can we build case studies around them? Is there more share a wallet there we can go earn? So that's a place for collaboration that sometimes is untouched. There's all that focus on new business and not enough on growing the existing business.
Yeah. I'll chime in. I'm sorry, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, for me, it's always been about like buy-in, right? So sales has to, in most cases that came from attribution. So showing sales that you're there to help them meet their new business number or their existing client sales numbers, and showing them how marketing could help them with that. For far too long, many sales teams just think, oh, well, you can help me with my PowerPoint presentation or my sales collateral. And that's, it's changing the conversation and showing them that your strategy is actually bringing them leads, and then showing them how many of those leads are converting into meetings or sales. And once they start to see that, they get really excited, at least in my experience, in trying to help generate new marketing ideas to go to the market. So that's usually where I had the most success in aligning sales and marketing departments.
Yeah, let me chime in with a sort of an opinion on that as well, Paul. I think Tim nailed number one is communication, because if you're not communicating between sales and marketing, bad things are going to happen, right? The old tradition is that, and I get to live in both worlds. I'm a salesperson, sort of born and bred, and I run a marketing company. So I live in both of these worlds every single day. And Tim, you and I were in these roles when we actually worked on real stuff. And, the old theory is that marketing people are too theoretical. They love their frameworks. They have their fancy degrees. They don't actually know what it's like. And then salespeople, they only hit numbers. They don't ever listen. They don't ever do what they're supposed to be doing. And the fact is, those are both true. Those are both a little bit cliche, but they're both true, right? And the real answer to that is to break yourself of those paradigms and communicate extremely well. And the second part I would add to that is metrics. If you're a business leader and you have a sales and marketing issue or a challenge, besides fostering really good communication, is make sure they're measured on the same darn thing. Yeah. If marketing is going to continually be measured on, followers on LinkedIn or traffic to your website or MQLs or something like that, and sales is being measured on sales, they're always going to live in a world apart. So get them as close as possible to being measured on the same thing. That way they have to communicate, because their incentive is exactly tied together. So I think it's a great question, and it leads to that. Anybody want to chime in with something else there?
Well, Christine, I'm curious. That's right up your alley, right? Are we listening to each other enough?
Well, I was going to say, market, you said it well. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus, marketing from Mars, sales are from Venus, whatever you want to say. So while I agree with all the sentiments, and I think, let's collaborate, let's talk, let's listen. The gap is how do we do that, right? And I think we go into the conversation. My experience is that salespeople want marketing to understand them, and marketing wants the sales force to understand them. And we're not starting the conversation with, what's it like for you, and what's it like, and where's the gaps, and how can we help each other? So it's not, the incentivization is a good start, but this is the slowdown. Where are the misses and where are the wins, and how do we really start to align to gain buy-in? Because they're two factions that are often misunderstood, and that's why they don't align. They don't understand one another completely. So if you just take the time to really create that conversation and alignment, you're going to move faster in the long run. Easier said than done if you expect them to just play nice in the playground together. They want the same things, but they want to go about it differently. So part of it is, how do you develop that conversation and strategy?
Yeah, I think that's great. Just a reminder for anybody on the line, you're welcome to throw a question in the chat, question in the Q&A. I just got another great question. So I can't remember who made this comment, but somebody talked about pivoting and not planning too far ahead. So the question is, when do I pivot my plan versus when do I persevere and keep going? And how do I know when to do which one? So I'll leave that one up to the group. When to pivot, when to persevere. Sounds right out of the lean startup methodology, because that is one of the hardest things to do, especially in a dynamic market. Who wants to grab that one?
I don't have the answer, but I have a great story that somebody told me one time.
Absolutely.
It's like you're in a tunnel and you have a pick and you're chipping at the wall. Sometimes the problem is you don't know if you're a mile from getting to the light and breaking through, or if you're like one more throw away. And that's the challenge, is to know when is it too soon to give up, and when do we know it's time, right? That's what I think you're describing. And that's the frustration, is where are we in the tunnel, right? So I'm just here to ask the question. Why don't you solve it, Steve?
Yeah, sure.
Uncertainty breeds like wanting to just, people are going to react to that very differently. So how do you know?
Yeah, hard one for me, for sure. But I think like with any, we try to design experiments to fail small. So pick the leading signal that says, all right, if in 30 days we don't see this, then, we'll adjust. I think if you don't know what your leading signals are, or you don't pick what you're aiming at, then you'll constantly be asking, have we given this enough time? Have we given this enough time? And before you know it, you've spent 2 years on a strategy because you didn't maybe agree ahead of time what the milestone should be.
So you're talking checkpoints, Steve?
Yeah. So maybe if let's say it's in the marketing world, it's a campaign, and we're gonna, the first milestone should probably be, maybe a couple weeks out. Say we're gonna run this, we're gonna see if we're getting response and see if it's taking, and if a few weeks out we've got nothing and it's dead on arrival, we know we need to pivot a little bit. But if we didn't have a agreed upon timeline, we might give it 6 months before you know it, we've spent a ton of money before we're ready to pivot. So just maybe figure out the milestone ahead of time.
It's interesting. So yeah, Steve, actually you got me thinking there, and that would kind of go back to kind of the importance of understanding and knowing the metrics as well. So
yes,
knowing how long to give it to. So like from a sales perspective, if we're selling a product, most sales cycle for products could be 20 to 30 days, but for services, it could be 90 days. And so, if you got to make sure you're giving it enough time. And yeah, it goes back to make sure you're tracking your metrics to understand how much time to even give it, really.
Yeah, Tim, you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, knowing your historical data, right? Having an understanding of, okay, we've ran these campaigns in the past, and usually we see, 10 meetings from that or whatever it may be, and really understanding what your KPIs are at that point, understand the historical metrics of it. You can forecast all you want, but if things don't go that way, you should kind of have in your mind, like, as you said, Steve, fail smallly, right? So have an idea. Like for us with Google Ads campaigns or LinkedIn lead generation campaigns, we usually do a 3 to 4 week cutoff period, right? Like obviously it takes time to optimize and get out in the marketplace and go and see, but if things aren't working the way that we anticipated, that's usually a sign for us that we either have to change it or cut it. So really understanding that historical metrics, I think is really important.
Yeah, Paul, can I build on that? So it's funny you brought up LinkedIn ads, because we run a ton of LinkedIn ads programs. And what I find when we're dealing with medium-sized, mid-market kinds of companies who want to experiment in LinkedIn ads, they've never actually thought about two extremely important things. Number one, what does success look like? Yeah. It's amazing. They just want more. They want leads. They want more sales. And it sounds great. Sure, we can run ads. And if that happens. And what I have learned the hard way is to go in there and ask them, what does success look like? Like, if we get this, we will all agree that that was success. And if we don't actually believe we can get there, then let's not try. Because I just declined a project 3 days ago, right? That basically said, we want you to run this particular kind of program. We looked at their stuff and we said, no matter what you do, we don't have a high degree of confidence that we can achieve that goal, point blank. And it's better to say that on day 0, that we don't even want to start trying,
right? Rather
than set yourself up for failure a month, 2 months, 3 months down the road. The second thing is, I think, and this goes back to data, and Tim, this is right in your world, is understanding your business's economics. I am shocked at the size of companies that don't understand the fundamentals of their business economics. So one question I love to ask people is, what's your average deal size? How profitable is it? Because if we're going to run a program, I'm going to make numbers up, out of a hat. If your average deal size is $100,000 and it's 70% margin, let's pretend, that means every time you get a new deal, you're going to have $70,000 in the bank, right? if you don't get one deal to pay for whatever the cost of whatever your program is, and it doesn't add up to more than 70,000, then you probably shouldn't run the program, right? And so just getting people to fundamentally think in a mathematical way, Paul, I know is up your alley. Tim, it's something you think about all the time. And obviously, Steve, you and I have had this conversation before. So I think those are all super, super important. And does that spark any thoughts here? And again, the question was back to when to pivot versus when to persevere.
I just wanted to add one thing, if I could, just conversationally, because I mean, obviously we need to look at the data and the logic and all that. So this is an and, not an or. But I think when you're in the midst of making those decisions while you're looking at the data, when you're meeting as a team and talking about these things, a really important question to poll and ask people is, how do they feel things are working? It's amazing when you ask for that question, the kinds of things you find out. That adds a lot more to the decision-making process. So even though that feels anecdotal and that's not factual and we're not basing on a lot, it's just something else to add. You'll be amazed what people will tell you and what you will uncover from that question that can add to the mix, that can really change how you have the conversation.
Christine, I'd love to build on that, because I think you're right. That quantitative versus qualitative feedback, there's a reason you need both, right? It just adds to everything. And there was a story from a previous career of mine. We used to sell a solution that did remote monitoring inside an oil refinery.
Wow.
And the sales were kind of down, and we were like, I don't get it. How come the revenue hasn't really taken off here? It's a great product. It allows you to remotely monitor all parts of your refinery. Like, why isn't this not working? So the quant looked terrible, and we were ready to kind of pivot away from the solution. And then we did one ride along with a customer where we had to gear up, put on the steel-toed boots. I walked out in a refinery, and that sulfur smell hits you and it stays with you. And then I realized it was the sensors were giving out because of the heat in the refinery. And the person who had bought the solution from us had to go manually in his truck, drive around and take all the readings by hand because our solution didn't work.
Wow.
And it was like instant empathy with, wow, okay, data might have told us this product line's not working, time to pivot and think of something else. But the qualitative of doing a ride out and just watching and observing quickly showed us, oh, we just got one part wrong. We didn't build this strong enough. But yeah, he would love to not get in his truck and have to drive around the refinery. So I love that blend of insights. It tells you so much.
Okay, that's great. Another question just came in, so I'm gonna bat this one to the group. So the needs of my sales force have dramatically changed over the last 2 years. How do I adjust to what my sales team is going to need? How about that? Maybe Tim, I could put you on the spot as the resident sales expert to answer that one.
Yeah.
Good luck, Tim.
Adjust to what they're going to need. I'm wondering what they're thinking there, but so how I'll answer it is maybe tools, because I think the sales world has changed a little bit these days. So I think, it used to be, I know I have gray hair, but I'm not that old. But back in the day, it used to be you knock on doors, right? And you walk in and you drop off a business card and you tell them, you ask for a meeting, and then it moved to cold calling and eventually emailing. But now there's so much automation now, and so much you can do to save time for the salesperson so they can focus on maybe more professional sales activities like LinkedIn or going to a network event, things like that. So I think adjusting to number one, it all goes back to who's your end customer and what's going to work for that end customer. But if buying a tool like and this is not a promotion for these tools, but buying a tool like Zoom Info or Sales Intel or Growbots, something like that, which builds lists for you and sends out email campaigns, if that's going to save your salesperson an hour a day, and then they can use that hour to be more creative with finding another prospect or going to a networking breakfast or whatever else they can do with their time there, then I think that's important to do for the salespeople, because they're certainly looking for those types of things, and you need them now. Those tools, yes, they're automation and they're robots and things like that, but they are faster than humans. So you can get out email campaigns, then they may not be personalized, but you can get out email campaigns quicker. So I think, finding out what would work for the salespeople and their needs. Hopefully that's what that question was relating to, but those are some of my initial thoughts.
I think to add on that, Tim, and those are great points, is really just understanding your audience and where they're going, right? Because they change every day, right? Where they live online, where they're going to consume information about your product or service, just really digging into that, looking at overall search trends, right? Like what's related searches to whatever your product or service may be, and really just having that full understanding of where they are, and then arming your sales team with either marketing campaigns that address those changes or collateral or whatever it may be. And then of course, as you mentioned, kind of like the lead nurturing aspect of that and helping them nurture those leads, because one of the biggest battles that we face is, oh, we generated 100 leads this month, we didn't generate any sales. Well, I was like, I'm not your sales team, right? So how are you nurturing them? So
They were bad leads.
So really kind of helping them in those two areas, I think is a great way to anticipate their needs, because they're always going to want more leads and they're always going to want more sales, right? That's just the way it is. So,
yep.
Paul, I was thinking of your comment earlier about attribution model, and I realized we're trying to get better at this at Oliver, but like we don't always share the intel with our sales counterparts that their account has been blowing up the website this month. They watched 3 videos, they attended our webinar, they downloaded all these assets, and that's great for maybe our attribution models. But if I haven't called the rep who owns that account and said, do you realize all that they're doing? Then I'm not really being a good counterpart. So I hope when I reflect on the last 2 years to be like, I hope I can put more in my sales reps' pockets to say, here's what the customers are up to. So maybe you can now make a well-timed phone call to say, I noticed you were, without being creepy about it, I noticed you were checking out these products on our site, but just
That sounded a little.
do you have a challenge, right? Is there something I can help you with? We haven't talked in a little while. Boy, like that's being a good partner.
And from a marketing standpoint, like those are small wins, right? And that's how you build that buy-in with your sales team. And it's just saying, hey, we generated all of this traffic to this particular portion of your, of our site or your territory, whatever it may be. And they get interested in that. A good salesperson would get interested in that and understand how they can utilize that more. So great point.
My answer is probably a little different, but I don't know. I think that salespeople are having a harder time differentiating themselves, getting the attention of the customer. People are zoomed out and people are tired, and I'm an extrovert, and I don't like people as much as I used to after being locked down, for the most part. So I think we have to help people realize not to sell all the time. Like that if we're just selling, I don't want to talk to that person. So it's more profoundly, we're more aware of it now. And so again, this is part of the slowdown, is how do you follow up and not sell and not have to show and not have to have something in your bag to say, let's fix it now. That is the people that I saw really early on in the pandemic that went hard at selling were the ones who lost their customers because they didn't realize now is not the time to sell. And that was a profound example of how we need to know when it's time to sell in a mini conversation or in the middle of a pandemic. And it's reading that and knowing when's the gas pedal and when's the brake. Well, because they're struggling, as we're hearing at our company, to know, and they're feeling a lot of time pressure to solve the problem, give the fix. And that's the thing that'll turn people off the fastest.
Yeah, Christine, it's interesting. You ended where I thought the conversation was going to go, because I think what's changed the most is people's appetite for salespeople. One of the first things I learned many, many years ago about selling, I'll never forget it. It was sophisticated B2B buyers hate salespeople. So the first rule is don't sell. Add value to them, teach them something, educate them, and then be there when it's time for them to make a purchasing decision. And it feels so much more true than ever during this pandemic, and where it feels like some people are going hardcore sales. It's like the people who are succeeding are taking that. And Tim, that makes me think of your comment about LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the perfect tool to go educate your audiences about problems, solutions, different ways to think about it, and to get yourself out there in a non-salesy way. How many of us have logged on to LinkedIn and seen so many spammy sales messages that were completely turned off?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden we learned something on LinkedIn and we're intrigued, and we may or may not buy from the person immediately, but we get that thought bubble in our heads about that. So I think the importance of thought leadership and really educating your customers. We have a great relationship with Social Sales Link, and one of their taglines is lead to your solution, not with your solution. And I think it's such a profound way to think about it, is if you lead with your solution, it feels salesy. If you lead to your solution, you're asking questions, you're probing, you're learning, you're teaching, you're educating. You're not saying, hey, buy my widget today because it's going to solve all of your problems. And I think that's just a different paradigm of how to think about it. I think that's probably the number one thing I think sales teams looking into 2022 need to be equipped with. And it's us as the marketers that need to put those tools in their hands. I don't know if that sparks a thought from anybody out there.
Well, what we share is that the most powerful story you can tell your customer is their own. Forget what you have to say about what you do, but when you understand their story and can reflect it and tell it to them, you will be memorable, you will be differentiated, and then you earn the right to start adding value, teaching, probing. That's really what gets you to the sale. People like to know that you get them before they want to hear anything about you.
That's awesome. Christine, that's a great point. So I don't know the stat, but there is a stat, and I'm sure you know it because you build a business around listening. But a good salesperson will listen 70% of a sales call and let the customer, listen 70% of the sales call, let the customer talk 70%, and they'll talk 30%. Like I said, I don't know the exact stat, but that's a great point there. And when we train our salespeople, one of the first things we tell them is listen, sit there and listen and let them tell you what they need. And then, you kind of direct it from there.
The only problem is we only hear 17 to 25% of what people say because we're told to listen since we're 3, but we're not taught how. So
how to listen.
Look, I appreciate the sentiment, but we treat it like walking. You have legs, so you learn how to walk. You have ears, you learn how to listen. So we need to arm. That's why I mentioned ask the feeling question of your employees. This will help with retention. I know you haven't gotten here yet, but this is about employees and how there's a lot of fear of management right now because we're going to lose people. We know that people are 74% more likely to stay with an employer if they're, quote, empathetic. Now, empathy is part of listening. It's not one or the other. So it's ask the feeling question of your customers, ask the feeling question of your employees, ask it when you're making decisions, and you will get more understanding, which will lead to at least a part of the listening.
Christine, I like to build on the thought. I mentioned as the reflection of my last 18 months is how communications became such a bigger part of the job, communicating with our employees, just trying to help them understand the journey of the business right now. And it's like empathy becomes compassion, right? Empathy is my ability to hear you and understand what it's like to be in your shoes, but compassion's then the drive to then go do something about it. And I think that's like, there's such a need of that in business today, to just put yourself in the shoes of the customer who's probably got 1,000 different things going on. And in our world, they're trying to keep hospitals going during COVID. The last thing on their mind is packaging, right? So the compassion is, if I can do everything to make sure that you have plenty of stock and that you don't have to worry about us and you maybe don't even have to call us for 6 months, then that's probably the best thing I can do for you as your partner.
Well, you're telling them their story, not your story, right? You're like, I want to be invisible so that you have one less thing to worry about, is saying, I get you. And
Absolutely.
so, I just think that we use a lot of deep words, but we don't really know how to enact it, which is not we're blaming everybody for not knowing how to do this, and we're not teaching them how. So that's the problem. But there are simple things to do, and that is a big shift in how we focus the conversation. Some people do it a little more intuitively than others, but by and large, we're salespeople, marketers are problem solvers, and we chase solving the problem, and we can miss the relationship and the communication and the process. And if we slow down.
Yeah. How do you teach EQ, I guess, is the question, right? Like, how do you teach EQ to sales and marketers who, are probably storytellers by nature? So that's the tricky challenge.
Yeah. Well, and extroverted salespeople can be storytellers, not necessarily. Most people say they're not really good storytellers, but we don't teach EQ. I was an athlete that didn't like to run. So if a coach threw the ball, I was like a dog, I'd chase it all day. So it has to be a byproduct. You have to give people the tools and the framework to do it. And then the insights follow. And those are personal insights, and that those human skills just are a byproduct when you use the right tools. But so, it's like anybody, the data is a tool, listening is a tool, how to listen and breaking that down is a tool. So it's really, we could all sit on the couch and do a lot of work around EQ. It can be very arduous. Not everybody's in for that game. But if you show people the tools and they can get immediate results, they're more inclined to go. So that's our approach.
I like that.
Awesome. That's awesome. So I'm going to call last call for questions here. Paul, we have a question here specifically for you, specifically designed. But I'm going to do a last call for any audience questions here, Paul. So the question is, I hear the term big data a lot. What does it mean and what is the future and what do I do about it?
I feel like big data is different for everyone, right? For us, it's, we're not a huge organization. So big data for us is really just audience research and audience data, and then our own data that we can pull from our analytics. So really, I think big data, it's a big buzzword, absolutely, but it really should be applied to who you are and what you're looking for. Big data, in my mind, is your most important data. So for us, it's understanding what is the most important data that we need, that we can make the best decisions about what we want to do for our strategies. And that can be anything from our own Google Analytics data, which is free. It can be some of our audience research data that we use various tools for. It can be our own sales and marketing data that we have through our own CRM. And then the tricky part is, which I'm sure we can go into a different webinar and talk all about, is aligning all of that and making sure that they all talk to one another and being able to generate insights from that to kind of roadmap out where you're going to go and how you're going to attack your audience and meet your overall goals. So I don't mean for that to be kind of a cop out of an answer.
No, not at all.
I honestly believe, and I'll stick to this, that big data is in the eye of the beholder. For huge organizations like SAP or IBM or whatever, their big data is something completely different, right? So that's kind of the way that I feel about big data.
Yeah, said slightly differently, Paul, on this sort of journey of how do we manage big data and make real business decisions out of it. I think the quality of the data is a function of how well you can articulate the business problem. Because it feels like today you can answer almost any question, right? If you have enough data or if you have the right type of data and you can manipulate it the right way and do all the things you're talking about. But if you ask a bad question at the root, you're almost always going to end up in a bad spot. We do this, we work in online data. So what are people searching for? What are people listening to? What are people reading? All of these types of things. And it feels like continually we have to go back and make sure that we're asking the right question so that the data that we pull kind of points in that right direction. So I think it's a great answer. I don't think it's a cop out at all. This is perfect. Well, awesome. So we're doing great. It's hard to believe we've been going for about 45 minutes. So I'm gonna just go around the horn and ask people to do one last. So all of our panelists, one last thought as we're planning for 2022. Any last thoughts? And I'll start maybe to my top left on the screen, which nobody else can see, is Christine. Then we'll go clockwise to Paul, Steve, and Tim. So you're on the spot, Christine. And Christine, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to share my screen and share your book link. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the whole listening paradigm as well as you talk about your answer.
Oh, sure. Well, thank you. Yeah, the book was released on October 15th. What does it cost you not to listen? Again, our belief is that understanding changes the game and it gives you the right to do a lot. So I guess, I think the answers are within. When you were talking, Paul, and I know your team, having worked with you, that I think that a lot of what you as a company do really well is help people find their own answers within by, making sure you're uncovering the right things so that you can really look at it. And so I think that's by and large true in organizations, is that the answers are within. So if you look that way and you look for those answers and you surround it, you're going to have success. Sometimes you need help with that. Sometimes you don't, but trust that the answers are within the organization and you'll find the right solutions.
Great answer, Christine. Thank you. Paul, you're next. Last thought.
Yeah, coming at this from strictly a marketing perspective, I'm here with amazing panelists that are looking at broader business goals and issues. I'll come at it from a marketing standpoint, and that is to really make sure that you're not so siloed that you don't understand what your broader business goals are. Every department's going to have their overall yearly goals, right? That's always going to happen. But how, especially from a marketing standpoint, how does what I do impact my business? And that's the most important question to ask. and how you can start to impact the business and meet your overall business goals from a marketing standpoint. So that's something that I always like to dig into and understand. And because again, it's all about how marketing will show their value to their overall organization. So
That's awesome, Paul. Thank you so much. Steve, last words.
I'm going to bookend what I opened with, which was stay close to your ops team so you're not promoting something that's going to make their life worse, is play the long game with digital marketing and content. So I'm kind of inspired by what Christine and Tim shared of the listening ratio, and what good sales does is inbound marketing versus over outbound marketing. Don't be so focused on the campaigns you're going to run and how many emails you're going to send, how many ads you're going to place, but good content to a website with strong SEO gets people coming to you long term, and just build that momentum, because that'll pay off better in the long run.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And last, certainly not least, Tim, tell us from a sales perspective.
That's awesome. Yes, and thanks for having me on, by the way. But yeah, just kind of closing thoughts. I know we talked a lot about looking at your data from last year and aligning it with your ideal customer. So my last thought would be put a sales plan together. So whether it's I know, yes, you probably have a business plan and things like that for the other departments, but I'm specifically talking about a sales plan. And I'm probably specifically talking about smaller, mid-sized customers, because what I found is they don't have a plan, right? They might know who their customer is, but how are you getting, I got a fly flying in front of my face. How are you getting to get to those customers? So like Raj said, what's your average deal size? Just kind of reverse engineer your revenue goal. So what are your revenue goals for 2022? And then reverse engineer it. What's your average deal size? How many meetings does it take to get to that deal size? How many calls, emails, things of that nature do you need to get to those meetings to eventually get to your revenue goal? So have a small, simple plan to get to that revenue goal with the right activities. Be my last closing thought there.
That's awesome. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Paul. And thank you, Christine. We really appreciate your time. Thanks, everybody, for the awesome Q&A. We appreciate all of the engagement. I popped in the chat all of these wonderful panelists' LinkedIn information. Give them a follow or a connect. They would love to hear from you. And I appreciate your time very much. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Raj.
Thank you all.
Everyone.
Thanks,
Take care.
everybody.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.